there are new rules to sales. We have on the board here, always be closing. Those are the old ABCs
Right.
of sales. And those are the ones
Right.
that I was trained with as a salesperson. But you have a
Yeah.
new set of ABCs. What are those ABCs?
Yeah, well, let's talk about why that set of ABCs is a little bit outdated. I think it's really important to recognize how much sales has changed in the last 10 years, arguably more in the last 10 years than in the previous 100. You know, most of what we know about sales and most of the kind of training that we have in sales comes from a world of information asymmetry, where the seller always knows more than the buyer. The seller has a huge information advantage on the buyer. That's one reason we have the principle of buyer beware. The principle of buyer beware is a principle about information asymmetry. It's not a principle about sales necessarily. It's about sales when the seller knows a lot more. If you know a lot more than, if I know a lot more than you do about what I'm selling, if I'm trying to sell you this used watch here, okay, and I know a lot about it, but you don't, I can rip you off, right? You got to be wary. It's buyer beware.
It's much
But
easier. It's much easier to rip me off.
It's much easier to rip you off because I know a lot more about it than you do. Think about buying a car 20 years ago. You walk into a car dealer, that car dealer is going to know a lot more about cars than you ever will. Okay? Buyer beware. But that's not our world anymore. Our world is a world of more and more information parity. And that kind of world where, you know, it's a pretty significant change. Buyers have gone from not much information, not many choices, and no way to talk back, to a world of lots of information, a quality of information in some sense, plenty of choices, and all kinds of ways to talk back. And that's a very different world. That's a world of seller beware. The sellers are on notice, and always be closing doesn't work in seller beware. It's not an effective technique. No one wants to be closed. No one wants to have that predatory approach, and so it will resist it. We have lots of choices, so we can go somewhere else. We have lots of information, so we can actually question what that predator kind of salesperson is saying. And if someone treats us like a jerk, we tell everybody on Facebook. And so, the new ABCs for a world of seller beware are attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. A, attunement, B, buoyancy, C, clarity. These are kind of the foundational qualities that are necessary in both sales and non-sales selling. At least this is what the social science tells us are the foundational qualities of effectively moving other people. Attunement is perspective taking. Can you take the other person's perspective? Buoyancy is, can you stay afloat on the ocean of rejection that is sales? And clarity is, can you go from a world where your comparative advantage is accessing information to one where it is making sense of information, distilling information, curating information. And so these three foundational qualities are really essential today, much more useful advice certainly than always be closing, and rooted very much in what the very best social scientists in the world know about this issue.
All right. And in your book, you highlight these lessons or the ABCs of selling with this interesting character, Norman Hall. And before we get into the principles, why'd you do that? Why'd you follow around Norman Hall, and how did you find him?
Okay, well, you know, I thought about, like, what's the quintessential kind of selling that happens in America? And one of the things in our survey that came out is people think of selling as selling cars. And so I visited a lot of car dealers. I went to an old-fashioned used car lot. I interviewed car dealers. I went to CarMax, which is sort of a new, more information parity approach to selling cars. But there is this notion, especially here in the States, about door-to-door sales. And I was always fascinated by this concept of the Fuller Brush Man. Now, a lot of Americans, Americans under 40 don't remember the Fuller Brush Man. But there was a time when these people were ubiquitous. Fuller Brush ends up being, it's a great American entrepreneurial story, actually. But there was a time when these guys, and they're almost always men, would travel around middle-class neighborhoods here in the United States and knock on people's doors. They have these large sample cases full of brushes, cleaning brushes, hair brushes, cleaning supplies, and try to sell you brushes. And they were ubiquitous at one point in the United States. One year in the 1950s, these Fuller Brush men made 50 million sales calls in a year in the U.S. at a time when the United States had only 43 million households. And so I figured, are there any Fuller Brush men left? They're almost always men, as I said. And I managed to find one of the very last ones, this wonderful man named Norman Hall, who's been selling fuller brushes for 40 years in the business district of San Francisco. And what I wanted to see is if, what this guy has learned over the last 40 years yielded any insights for selling in this new realm. And most people are very surprised that fuller brush men even exist anymore. The company itself is in chapter 11.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to this channel for more interviews, and if you want to go further and be live on the interviews, you can go to mmt.tv/live to find out how. Like on Facebook and follow on Twitter to ask your questions, and be sure to get on the mailing list. Go to mmt.tv to get access to all the things that are not contained in these interviews. All the links are mentioned below, and until next time, break the rules, change the game, and be a rock star.